Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and tonight we're going to actually have some fun because we're going to be talking in terms of collaboration and how people from across the political spectrum or who may not agree with everything that one another propose to be truth can work together to get things done and wreak havoc on a massive level. And we're going to do that with our guest this evening, David Schonbrunn, who is with transdeaf.org. And David, I appreciate you coming deep into the lion's den or enemy territory or how you'd like to, however you might want to explain it. But tell us a little bit about you, your background, and some of the activism you've been involved with TransDeaf.
Well, I'm a progressive environmentalist with a strong streak of libertarianism.
That's allowed?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, good.
And one of the things that I detest is government waste. And so I've been a transit advocate for the last 20 years. Most of that time was spent trying to change MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, trying to get them to focus on accomplishing results. Turns out they were not interested in that, and in fact, when you look at what they've done over the last 20, 30 years, you realize that they're not there for the public interest. They are there, as far as I can tell, to enrich their cronies. This is crony capitalism at the local level.
Right. And this is probably fascinating for folks on the right side of the aisle to hear coming out of someone who's self-proclaimed being a progressive environmentalist, that's common ground. For those of us who have been exposed to the MTC folks, we've seen the cronyism, we see how things can be directed toward payoffs and everything else, but that's something that instantly we can agree about.
Well, and that's why I wanted to point out, I attended a talk by Ralph Nader, who was in town this past week, and he wrote a remarkable book, Unstoppable. And his point is that people on the left and people on the right, when they're dealing with issues that are at ground level, and they've moved away from high-level abstractions, that they have all kinds of things in common: an interest in fairness, an interest in seeing government money spent well, an interest in protecting health, protecting safety. And all of these things are in contrast to it's actually a cliche now, the polarization left and right. The reality is, if we're talking about things that are in our own neighborhood, we have the potential of dealing very well with each other and being in a lot of agreement.
Right. And so, and full disclosure for the audience, we actually met working on something that's pairing up people that are in the Sierra Club with people that are in the Tea Party to fight a sales tax measure that's transportation based.
In Alameda County.
In Alameda County.
And so your part of the group is opposed because it would double the sales tax for transportation in Alameda County. And my part of the coalition is concerned because the sales tax plan it completely ignores the issue of climate change. And so we see a huge expected increase in driving with the accompanying greenhouse gas emissions. And this is unacceptable in what we think of as an area that should be leading the state and the country in responding to the challenge of climate change.
Right, and in both cases, although people that are more quote-unquote Tea Party or conservatively oriented aren't necessarily as interested in the greenhouse gas component, we have a common goal in that we both want it to stop.
Exactly.
And that if something is going to require tax money being taken out of our pockets, we both want to make sure that it's going to be done effectively and it's actually going to achieve something, versus just being, it was described in one of our meetings as the Christmas tree approach to legislating, where everybody gets a little something. But I look at it as, it's just like, that's a lot of the stuff that gets regifted at Christmas parties, is stuff that's trinkety, that doesn't really accomplish anything. It's not of real value, so people give it away once they get it anyway. It's just not valuable.
Well, and let's talk about the kinds of things that I have fought in the past.
Let's do that.
So MTC has this very ugly history of spending billions upon billions of dollars and claiming they're doing it to increase transit ridership. Well, my organization initiated a lawsuit, and then we were joined by a whole bunch of other organizations that won a trial court victory back in 2001 that said MTC had failed to live up to a commitment to increase regional transit ridership by 15% over 1982 levels. This was a very important ruling, and the problem is we were overturned by a George Bush appointee at the Court of Appeal who added his vote and made it 2-1 to overturn our decision, which meant we had nothing. The significance of this is that here we are 30 years after this commitment was identified. Regional transit ridership is now lower than it was 30 years ago. And this is after spending many tens of billions of dollars. So these BART extensions beyond the original system, in my view, have been an incredible mistake. The BART extension to San Jose is the worst mistake of all because the cost will be phenomenal by the time all the cost overruns are done. And so we very strongly oppose the BART extensions. We think, and the Oakland Airport connector for BART, these are all projects meant to hand off money to the private sector, to contractors, et cetera, but not benefit the public. And so, interestingly enough, high-speed rail has exactly the same problem. And in fact, high-speed rail, the policies and direction of it came from some of the very same people that made San Jose literally the worst operating light rail system in the country, the worst statistics. And so we have fought against the high-speed rail project as high-speed rail advocates. This is a very nuanced position, as you can understand.
But it makes sense because it's the same thing as what's happening with the sales tax measures and other things. People can be in favor of the general idea, but when they do the actual research, and the devil's always in the details, if you've got a crap version of that system that you're hoping will come to town or will gain benefit, then it's not worth taking a broken version just to say you've got one. You want one that works.
Well, even worse for high-speed rail, we're convinced that their actual project is to spend $6 billion of federal money, and that's it. That they
not
literally
to accomplish anything workable, just to spend the money.
Yes, that literally is what they're doing because they have no plan to get anywhere else. And this was apparent 3 years ago.
But it goes beyond you just not wanting to see this iteration. You've actually taken it to the court level. Tell us a little bit about your suit against CARB.
Well, before we get to that one, my organization has been involved in 3 environmental lawsuits against the High-Speed Rail Authority in terms of its environmental impact report over how the train would come from the Central Valley to the Bay Area. And my organization went into this because it's obvious that one of the greatest problems in the Bay Area is the commute coming in from the San Joaquin County over the Altamont Pass. And so to us, recognizing that billions of dollars were about to be spent to create new infrastructure, it was beyond insane to put that infrastructure anywhere other than where there's an actual problem to be solved. Instead, MTC recommended that high-speed rail put the line over the Pacheco Pass, where there's no traffic congestion, nobody's going there. But there were people in Sacramento who were very connected to the Democratic Party who were busily buying up land over there, okay? And so all of the environmental reviews were bogus. They were very well done. They passed judicial scrutiny, even though they were bogus. We had a high-speed rail expert firm from France design a route over the Altamont Pass. The High-Speed Rail Authority refused to study it, and we just got an appellate decision back where the Court of Appeal said, nah, no problem here. The High-Speed Rail Authority did just fine. So we twice knocked out environmental impact reports done in that particular project. What happened after that is I've been part of the legal team that filed a taxpayer suit. This is known as TOS, John TOS versus the High-Speed Rail Authority. And in that case, we managed to win a ruling in the Sacramento Superior Court that the funding plan for the first part of the high-speed rail project did not comply with the requirements of the bond measure. We've just received a very unpleasant appellate decision that overturns those decisions. And so we're now evaluating whether or not to ask the Supreme Court for review. But we think that the court's major holding was, well, if you promise something in a bond measure, it doesn't really matter. It's not enforceable.
Well,
that's essentially the ruling that they gave.
But that's what the citizens signed up for, was the promise that they thought that they were being given. And
that's why we think that the Supreme Court, there's a decent likelihood they would take up our appeal if we file one.
Yeah, because basically it's another circumstance where you're negating the vote of the citizens, and they're starting to get very worried about all of the overturning in the courts of things that they thought they had some control over generally. So
they meaning citizens?
The citizens
yes.
are very bothered by the fact that they don't believe their vote counts for anything, because even if their vote is counted and they win, they still ultimately don't get what they thought that they were voting for.
Well, that's what this court decision says.
Absolutely, it says that.
And so we think because of that, that there would be reason for the Supreme Court to want to reestablish the integrity of the voter-approved bond process.
Right.
So then on top of these cases,
there's another one.
We filed another case. I personally attended the Air Resources Board meeting and filed comments on what's called the scoping plan, which is how the Air Resources Board proposes to respond to the challenges of climate change. The Air Resources Board was given the responsibility for the state to manage this response. And so we filed comments that said, no, actually, high-speed rail does not reduce greenhouse gases, it increases them. And I provided them with a study that showed that the huge amount of emissions that come from the vast amount of concrete that would be put into viaducts, bridges, etc., would generate so much CO2 that it would overwhelm the reductions that would come from actually operating the train for at least 20 to 30 years, right. At least. So the Air Resources Board did not respond to my comments. And I also made the comments in person at their adoption hearing. There was no meaningful response. So they have no defense for our suit, which says they didn't respond. And in fact, right now, the evidence based on what we introduced says, no, high-speed rail will increase greenhouse gases.
Right.
So part of our suit is to force them to review this and to reconsider that. But the other part of the suit is we seek to enjoin the state controller from giving cap and trade money to the High-Speed Rail Authority. So the idea was this was the only money that they were going to be seeing for a while because of our other victory in TOS. And so we'll see what happens with this one, but I'm convinced they have no defense.
Right. And so, but this is an important skill for, I mean, many of the folks that watch the show or who have participated in things like Plan Bay Area testimony and other things don't realize that when you testify, and if your testimony is ignored, not responded to, you've educated the people who are making the decisions and they ignore it anyway, that there could be potential legal ramifications. Am I misreading that?
Not at all. I learned a long time ago, particularly in dealing with MTC, that the public input process was essentially a waste of time. In fact, I found it insulting because the decision makers are not at all interested in what the public has to say. That their audience is other politicians, people who are elected to office in the cities and counties of the region. And so the public is essentially a fifth wheel in that process. I believe MTC understands its role as a broker to divvy up the pork and to essentially make everybody pretty much happy, and to slap around the recalcitrant ones a bit so that everybody sits down and shuts up.
It plays nicely.
Yeah, and so I learned a long time ago that the only way to be taken seriously in these places is to bring a lawyer. So we've sued MTC about a half a dozen times. Not with success, however. That's part of the disappointment. They have managed to dodge bullets. So they've been very lucky, but they have created the perfect system of unaccountability.
And you tried to introduce accountability, which was the whole, I mean, the whole first suit that you talked about.
Yes.
By making them responsible for the promises that they made.
And produce results.
Exactly.
One of the very interesting things about MTC is it has never gone back and evaluated itself.
And within the planning community, because I've deliberately asked that question, well, who goes back and does a post-mortem to figure out if you actually achieved what you said you were going to achieve? And within the planning community, we don't normally do that.
Well, it just happens that I was looking at one of their documents, and they said they were projecting a 29% increase in transit usage as part of the air quality analysis they did. And as I told you earlier, transit ridership actually went down.
Not by a little.
No. Well, actually, not by a lot, but it went down. And so not only did they have methodological problems, but they have no interest in self-correction. Okay? This is not an organization that wants to build on its past, but it just wants to forget the past, let's divvy up the money that we have on hand. And the answer to all transportation problems is
more money.
Exactly.
So if you're the king of the world, or at least able to conduct a peaceful overthrow of MTC, how do you change that? What would be your solution?
I actually was asked to give suggestions to the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee, and they put out a bill that had my suggestion in it, which was to have full-time elected commissioners.
Okay.
The idea being that there's a direct accountability to the public, and that the individuals are there full-time so that they really absorb the material and they get to the point where they can push back against staff and actually provide policy direction. That's not currently how the commission operates.
No, in many of these bureaucracies that are set up at local or at regional levels, people are, because they're part-time in each of these roles that they seem to be taking on, they're completely reliant upon staff for the recommendation to move forward with this, move forward with that, spend money with these people or these. And so will the full-time fix the problem? And how do you see it?
It would help a lot. And this is what Portland Metro did, Portland, Oregon. And they are one of the truly successful areas in terms of planning and executing and achieving results. I know one of the factoids that I remember is that they doubled the jobs downtown and did not increase the parking. And it worked because they've got people on transit.
Okay. And so are you looking at laying out these individuals throughout the region, or would they still be centralized in Oakland or San Francisco somewhere?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because particularly for your audience, there is a really tremendous misunderstanding in terms of issues of regionalism. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate this opportunity to speak to this. We hear from the conservative side, local control, local control, local control. Mm-hmm. But what people who say that miss is that they don't just stay at home. They don't just stay in their town. They don't just stay in their county. They expect to have mobility throughout the entire region. Mm-hmm. That cannot work if all planning is local.
Well, there has to be some subset of something that happens that looks at neighbor disputes and everything else. One city ramification.
It's far more than neighbor disputes. What's not understood is that a plan that's good for a city cannot be scaled up to work for a region.
Right.
A city might typically be dependent on the automobile as the primary means of getting around. When you have an entire region with 7 million people, that doesn't work anymore. And I have to say that the really striking observation that is not understood by anybody, I feel like I'm the only one saying this, is that we have now reached the end of the era where the single occupant auto works. It no longer works anymore. And we have come to a time where we have to change how we get around, particularly the longer distance trips through the region. And that's why it's clear to me that to make regional travel work, we need to look at this much bigger picture and create infrastructure that makes for convenient trips. And of course, that's not what MTC is interested in doing.
Right.
It doesn't plan. It just hears other people's ideas. But there is actually a need for somebody to be at the regional level and say, no, we actually need infrastructure that would take people commuting in from San Joaquin County and bring them to the north end of San Jose, not downtown, not to the Diridon station, because there's nobody there. Right. But the employment is north first and north of there, and San Francisco. And if we were to build a system like that, that would start to make a dent in the problems we have.
Yes, going to where the jobs are versus trying to create jobs where they want the transit to be.
I guess that's right, but I probably should use this opportunity to echo VTA's slogan, going from where you don't live to where you don't want to go.
Well, on that note, can you just tell people how they can get a hold of you if they want to learn more about the initiatives you're working on?
Sure. We're at transdef.org, transdef.org. Contact us via info@transdef.org, and love to hear from people.
All right. Well, thank you very much, David, for sharing with us. And if you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. And although we appreciate the help that they provide to help keep this show going, and we're on our 3rd year now, so it's been a relatively long run, what they're best known for is their speaker series. And so that occurs normally the first Tuesday of each month. That'll be changing in November. But it occurs at the IFES Portuguese Hall right here in Mountain View, about 3 minutes from here at 432 Steerland Road. This evening, Sam Paredes, Gun Owners of California, will be speaking, and in September, Mark Mix, the president of the National Right to Work. October 7th will be Pam Geller. She's a blogger and a commentator on radical Islam. And then May 12th, Alan West will be making an appearance at the forum. You can learn more at theconservativeforum.com. In closing tonight, I just wanted to reiterate that if we come from different ends of the spectrum, it doesn't mean we can't work together. And so don't discount that just because someone may be different than you on the political spectrum, it doesn't mean that they can't be a ready ally to help you get accomplished what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's fighting tax initiatives, whether it's fighting for property rights or others, because people may want things for different reasons, but as long as you want the same objective, it makes sense to collaborate. On that note, I'd like to thank you for joining us this evening on The Right Side. I've been your host, Chris Pareja, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in person or on the show sometime soon. Thanks again, and good night.